I'm in our retail beekeeping supply store today where we have a steady stream of customers that ask an array of questions. As you might imagine, there are several questions that get asked more than others. An example would be, what is the best way to feed? What are the best feeders? Another might be, what is the best mite treatment? What's the pros and cons to the different systems of treating for mites? One question that we get asked a lot is, what is the best bottom board? Are screen bottom boards better than solid bottom boards? And if so, what are the reasons? I have a lot of experience with screen bottom boards. I've had hundreds and hundreds of them over the decades. I was involved in a study with the University of Georgia nearly 20 years ago that asked the question, do screen bottom boards help with mite control? I donated some colonies for part of that study. I'm going to try to give an honest review. There are pros and cons to both bottom boards. I do not currently use screen bottom boards. I prefer solid, but I readily admit there are reasons for using a screen bottom board. I'm going to talk about why one person might choose one over the other. I'm going to show 3 examples of bottom boards we sell in our store. They're all widely available, nothing special about them. This is a standard reversible bottom board. The reason they call it reversible is because you have a choice of entrance depth. If it's upright one way, you have 3/8 of an inch. And if you reverse it, you have 3/4. I prefer the 3/8, but many people prefer the 3/4. This is a standard screen bottom board, widely available. It too is reversible. You have a choice of 3/4 or 3/8. This is a screen bottom board with a slide out tray, widely available. Most bee supply outfits have it. The slide out tray is used for 2 purposes basically. One is to block the ventilation in the winter, keep the draft out. The other is for measuring mite drop through the screen. Coat it with some substance that will make the mite stick, and you can count the mites that have dropped through. I don't have much purpose for that. That's an inaccurate way of counting mites. It does not give you a percentage of mite count on the bees. I prefer the alcohol wash. I think the reason that most people use screen bottom boards is to reduce their varroa mite count, and they do indeed do that. That study that I was involved with the University of Georgia that I mentioned earlier was overseen by Keith Delaplane and Jamie Ellis, and they conclusively showed that mites were reduced by 14 to 15% on colonies that had a screen bottom board. They also used the term that was statistically insignificant, and I agree with that assessment. But as an overall mite treatment strategy alone, it's just not good enough. We have our own preferred mite treatment techniques. We like oxalic acid vaporization in winter when the bees are broodless. And last fall, or last August I should say, we used Apivar strips around the 1st of August. That worked quite well, that combination. We have a very low mite count at this time. We like to have a mite count that's 1% or less. That's one of the problems with the sticky sheet screen bottom board measurement technique. It shows you that you have a mite load, but it doesn't show you the percentage of mites per bee. That's why we like to use an alcohol wash to give us a more accurate count of the mites on our bees. There are other advantages to screen bottom boards. One is extra ventilation. If it's very hot, it can help the colony from not overheating. Of course, it's a double-edged sword. In very cold weather, it can be detrimental to the colony. They do, as I showed, have screen bottom boards with a slide-in panel that can block the draft, but it's not as significant as a solid bottom board. And of course, for someone like me, that would be another piece of equipment that I would have to keep track of. I have a little bit of a story about ventilation that occurred to me maybe about 10 years ago. I had a yard of bees through the winter that had half screen bottom boards and half solid bottom boards. And in the early spring in February here in Georgia, I noticed that the colonies with screen bottom boards were not building up as quickly as the colonies with solid bottom boards. We took some plastic and laid under the boxes on top of the screen in the colonies with screen bottom boards, and they immediately started to build up quicker. It wasn't a windy spot, but it was a cold winter, and it obviously was having an effect on those colonies, and I've seen that several times. I know a lot of people say that colonies overwinter just fine with screen bottom boards, but they do. I've still got a couple out there that I haven't thrown in the dumpster yet. But they take a little longer to build up in the spring, and to me that's a big deal. Another pro to screen bottom boards is less condensation in the winter. I guess it's because they have more air moving around in there. They stay drier, the lid stays drier, the boxes stay drier on the walls with a screen bottom board. And in some situations that might be better than having a solid bottom board, but it's minor for me, and it still doesn't override the other bad things about screen bottom boards. When you use screen bottom boards, one of the first things you notice is that the brood nest stays away from the bottom board a little more than a solid bottom board. Your frames don't get drawn out completely down to the bottom bar sometimes with a screen bottom board. You'll also notice that the queen doesn't lay as close to the bottom board with a screen bottom than it does with a solid. It's very noticeable if you use white or light foundation in comparison to black foundation. If I had a strategy for using screen bottom boards, I think I'd switch all to black foundation. I'm pretty sure that the light affects the brood nest with white foundation. Another thing to consider is that the bees try to keep their brood nest at about 60% humidity, and they have techniques for doing that. If they are wide open to the environment, I'm just going to raise a question: does it make it harder for them to keep their humidity constant? Maybe in a high humidity environment it might be tougher. Maybe in a very dry environment it might be tougher. Also, bees have techniques for keeping their cavity cool. One is to distribute droplets of water around the nest and to evaporate those droplets of water in order to bring the temperature down. I wonder if it might be harder for them to do that if they have a screen bottom board and they're open to the environment. Also, another drawback to screen bottom boards is the debris that falls through the screen. Now, at first, you would think that not having debris on your bottom board could be a good thing, and I suppose it is, but you have to consider that all that debris falls on the ground where the ants and other critters can get to it. If you have screen bottom boards, I'd highly recommend keeping the ground clean under them. I think it would be helpful. Another problem that we have with screen bottom boards is with our oxalic acid vaporization. You could block the bottom board with the tray that we saw earlier, but again, it's just a piece of equipment that I don't want to keep around, try to keep track of. Also, with formic acid, you would have to keep your bottom board tray in. And something to consider if you're using formic acid is that formic acid eats galvanized wire, which is what most screen bottom boards are using. And over a few years, it can really ruin the screen on your bottom board. So if you're using formic acid, that's something to consider. Another problem that you can have with screen bottom boards, this happened especially when I had screened pallets that were closer to the ground. We had grass growing through the screen, and it got to be a problem in some locations. Certain grasses, the bees just can't keep them at bay, so to speak. Certain plants can grow right through the screen. And occasionally you'll get bees under the screen hanging out under the screen. I think they're lost bees. And you don't have that with solid bottom boards near as much. There are some people that will argue that a screen bottom board is closer to natural, and I kind of disagree with that. When you have a colony in a cavity and it's able to put that cavity in the condition it wants, it usually reduces the entrances, and it's usually not an open floored cavity. I think they prefer cavities with a solid floor. So for us, the pros for a solid bottom board outweigh the pros for a screen bottom board. But I understand the reasons some people would choose a screen bottom board, and I wouldn't dare tell them that my ideas are better than those. It really comes down to whatever works for you. I hope my ideas help some of you. Thank you.